Welcome to Real Physics. Today I have two guests, two special guests, because they have an own podcast, Demystify Science. I think it's a wonderful channel. You absolutely should go there. And well, I really appreciate it because I think you do really a service to science by inviting all these people, giving a voice to these, well, heterodox scientists. I am a heterodox scientist myself. So I'm applauding a little bit myself, but I've been there a couple of times. But well, I think this is the style I wish would be more common in today's environment, scientific environment, because we need a broader discussion. Academia is too narrow and too focused on the fashions that perpetuate themselves over the decades. So yeah, I think it's really a great initiative, a great thing what you started here. And I also admire the broad approach. You have covered really a lot of yeah, interesting issues ranging from, well, basic physics, which is my specialty, but you also have interviewed biologists and people talking about AI and whatever. I think that's, yeah, admirable. And yeah, I'm a little bit curious if you like to start, how all that came about. What's your background? And yeah, although this project as a couple, I think it's a very nice thing that you. It's a little bit to be in the, how do you say, in the crosshair as a scientist being interviewed by you two. So you keep talking to one, and the other one notices your weaknesses, your weak points. It's like a police
Oh,
at
I'm
the
sorry
police
about that.
station. But yeah, that yeah, I think
The
that
police
adds
station.
a lot of interesting flavor to the conversation.
Out
So
of
yeah, I don't know who
curiosity,
wants to start.
which one
Anastasia?
of us do you see as the good cop and which one is the bad cop?
No, I don't. Yeah, I don't want to interfere here, really.
I mean,
No, but
Anastasia, you
that's
can
not.
you can
I don't
introduce
think
this,
this
but
is the role. Yeah, you have different approaches, but I think, yeah, I really like both of your questioning. Yeah, yeah. You're Anastasia. You're not afraid of, yeah. I mean, uh, really trying to get to the bottom of it, and that's challenging somehow because you realize that you need to explain better. But yeah, it's a good thing. Yeah.
To Shiloh's eternal frustration.
no. You can introduce us. I just wanted to just make one quick correction. The name of the podcast is Demystify Sci. It used to be called Demystifying Science, but somebody stole the
Oh,
name from us
oh,
to
sorry.
start
Yeah.
a
Okay.
medical
Anyway.
animations channel on YouTube, which has nothing to do with us. So if people go and look for Demystifying Science, they will find these really beautiful 3D animations of medical anatomy stuff. But that is not us. We are Demystify Sci, the Demystify Sci podcast everywhere. But yeah, do you want to tell our story, Nasir?
Sure. We always give this spiel when we meet people to see if they want to come on the podcast. So I feel like it's very well rehearsed at this point. But Shiloh and I spent probably combined almost 25 years working in laboratories, various kinds of research, cancer research. I did tuberculosis, aging, immunology, and eventually the path that you follow when you work in laboratories is that you end up in graduate school because everybody that you meet tells you, oh, you should definitely go to grad school, you should absolutely get a PhD, because by the time that you're working in a laboratory, what else is there to do? You're supposed to become a professor eventually. And I think that both of us had a very curious approach to science and hoped that we would arrive at graduate school and find that somebody had figured out the answers. I think this is a really common story where people go out into the world and they pursue some kind of technical career and they figure that at some point they will end up at a sufficiently rarefied atmosphere where the people that they're surrounded by are truly deep thinkers in the kind of Socratic, Platonic ideal of what it means to think very hard about a topic. What are you going to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. Since when I was a little kid, I read all of these physics books. Brian Greene, Michio Kaku, these kind of things, and I had a real hard time comprehending them. Like the stories didn't make
That's a good
sense, and
sign.
Well, and then I eventually found this blog online by this guy named Peter Voigt, who was a big critic of string theory and a lot of this mathematization. And so I was really excited to go to this grad school in particular because I really wanted to meet these people like Brian Greene and Peter Voigt because they're at this university.
Mhm.
And so that was, in some sense, fueling the naivete that once we get there, like people will have these amazing interactions with these people who might have the answers to these problems that we discovered long, long time ago.
And there's just a nearly mythological fall from naivete because when we got to Columbia, we realized that there wasn't people who had the answers. There's no book that somebody is keeping somewhere in some dusty library where you can open the pages and the light of wisdom will shine on your face and finally you'll understand electricity and magnetism and gravity and it's all written in
Yeah,
Latin
yeah,
and
that's the picture one has and when
that's
entering
what I thought.
university. Yeah. Hmm.
And so we came out of that and we realized that nobody else was focused on these questions and that we needed to figure it out because if we weren't going to, nobody else seemed like they were. And so here
Hmm.
we are.
Hmm.
This is before we found you, of course, and
Yeah.
Pierre and some. I mean, there's actually a rich ecosystem underground of people who
Hmm.
are interested in narratives that haven't fit into the textbooks, but it took
Hmm.
us a while to figure that out. And I think the podcast is just our way of discovering new ideas. We don't always agree with the ideas of the people that come on our
Hmm.
show, but generally
Yeah.
speaking, we try to make sense of them and get those ideas to be unfurled in a way that the audience can follow. And we try to let people make up their own minds as much as possible. So
Hmm. Hmm.
that's the story.
Hmm. So if I understood correctly, it was the common thing was, I mean, you're coming from biology, you're from physics, right? Or even solid state physics, Shilo, right? Or your background.
Yeah,
Uh,
my PhD work was in elastic mechanics in a
mhm.
biophysical system.
Yeah, yeah,
So
we touched that in the ether episode. Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
elasticity. That's right.
So you had these common deep desire of, yeah, truly understanding what's going on in the laws of nature, but at the same time, yeah, this naivety entering. I mean, everyone, or me included, when I entered university, you have this idea that there will be something who knows all this and will eventually explain it, and then you realize that, yeah, I mean, how to explain that? People just also boiling water. No, I don't know if this is the right idiom, but that's something very doing the usual things. Yeah, it's nothing, not full of geniuses, the university. So you realized eventually that there is, yeah, well, frustration might be even too harsh, but there is definitely a shortcoming in what the idea of that university, all these big names, Brian Greene, and what's the outcome at the very end. So uh,
Can I just say, like, it was full of geniuses for sure.
mhm,
Like, there were,
mhm,
like, my advisor is a bona fide genius.
mhm,
But that doesn't mean that you're open-minded just because you're a genius. And
mhm,
so,
mhm,
you can be really, really smart and still be locked into these historical narratives where you just take the story for granted and you're not aware of all of the descent that was happening underwater the entire time, right? So
mhm,
you can, I think a lot of the problems in modern physics, in many disciplines, probably come down to really good ideas that people stopped pursuing because they were out of fashion at some point.
mhm,
And they never got developed and they never ended up being
mhm,
pursued to their climax. And
mhm,
so I think it's possible for the university to be full of really smart people, but they're really locked into a belief structure that keeps them from considering some of these more wacky, out of the box ideas.
yeah. I think that's something we heterodox scientists also have to realize, even if it seems quite obvious that the standard models are, I mean, somewhere are wrong. We underestimate, I mean, these people working on these standards are still bright people, still very smart, skilled scientists, and you shouldn't underestimate their yeah, capacities for that reason. But it's also true that, of course, we have these effects of sociology and science, and as you mentioned, people are continue to work on a model just because it's been done for decades. And mhm. Yeah, but coming a little bit back, so as a couple, that project started. So you knew each other at university, and then Was that a trigger to become? No, maybe it's too personal. Was that a trigger to become a couple? What was first the post podcast or first the couple or?
No, I don't think it's too personal. I'm super proud of what we've made together. Not just our work, but the relationship that we've built to one another. We actually met at the interview for grad school on the last night. So after you do all of your interviews and everything, I think it was after the interviews, was it? Yeah. They kind of take you on all of these social activities, and at the end of all the dinners and everything, they put us in a bar all together. And
Mhm.
I don't know how to tell this story. Nastia probably has a different memory of it than I, but uh, bail me out. No?
It's all
I
yours.
mean, basically, one of the older grad students who was chaperoning all of us was like, "Hey, you guys actually work at the same university back in San Francisco," because we were interviewing in New York on the other side of the country. And they're like, "You
Mhm.
should talk to each other." And so we started talking, and we just kept talking for hours. We actually ended up going on this ridiculously long walk from the Upper West Side all around Central Park. It was freezing. It was snowing, I think, outside. We ended up in this, what was it, a Ukrainian diner on the Lower East Side for quite a few hours. And then, yeah, at the end of the night, we went home. We went our separate ways. And actually, I didn't know if Nastia was ever going to talk to me again. I didn't hear from her for a week after we got back to San Francisco. But then we started we were both into rock climbing. There was a really amazing rock gym near UCSF where we were working at the time. And
Mhm.
we started just climbing on our lunch breaks and hanging out
Mhm.
and talking. And I don't know, one thing led to another. Next thing you know, we're driving across the country to go to grad school together.
I
Mhm.
think we functionally moved in together with it. I mean, we left for grad school, lived together for those 3 weeks, and then kind of just never really lived apart again. And that's almost 11 years ago now.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so we just kind of kept working on stuff. I mean, I think that it was based on the fact that we were curious about the same things. We
Mhm.
just had a burning curiosity about the world and wanted to figure it out. And we're both disagreeable enough that we figured that the other person was just the right kind of disagreeable.
Mhm. Yeah, that's what you need to be in science. I think a high level of disagreeable. Yeah, that's a good thing. So, but the podcast started later. Started a couple of years ago. You were experimenting with these little comic puppets initially, which
We
wasn't a
tried a
good
lot
idea,
of
I think.
things, yeah. Like we wrote for some different magazines for a while. We were writing for Nautilus and Discover, Astronomy magazine, places like
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
I mean, look, we knew we didn't want to just get stuck in a lab again. I think we were both working in the public school system, doing some substitute teaching right after grad school too. Just like any Nastia was guiding in the mountains, we were doing really anything could do to get money. But we started writing for magazines, and that was kind of uh, what's the word, suffocating in a way, because you have this editor that's always rewriting your
Mhm.
pieces for you.
Mhm.
And so we'd
Yeah.
always have these really cool ideas for pieces, about like what is electricity, and then we'd actually play with some interesting models, but the editor would always just be like, no, like you're not doing that.
No, 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 no.
Um,
I have also bad experience with guys from, I mean, yeah, magazines, and then a chemist comes along. Don't be offended, that corrects your facts about cosmology. It's just, yeah, kind of ridiculous what's going on in this. Yeah.
yeah, it was kind of painful, but we were recording like we would interview people for those magazines, right? To write
Mhm.
a story. We would get a few different perspectives on whatever the subject was.
Mhm.
And we realized that the interviews themselves were gold. Like they were really interesting, the things that people would say. And by the time you chopped it down to a magazine piece, you lost a lot of really good stuff. And
You
Mhm.
lost 99% of it because in a magazine piece that's 1,500 words long, you can get maybe two or three quotes from somebody, but you
Yeah,
talk
yeah,
to them
yeah,
for
yeah.
45 minutes to an hour.
so
That's
we're like,
almost
let's
as
just,
as bad as CERN does with the triggering of the data and throwing away
yeah, or that
99%.
black hole image or the CMB. Yeah. So we were like, let's just release the interviews. Let's just make a podcast out of this and see if people are into it. And
Mhm.
I mean, we tried it with the puppets at first because we were scared of putting our faces on the internet. Because we were like,
Mhm.
look, if we succeed and reach a lot of people, we don't want to, lose our privacy. We don't want people to be stopping us on the street. But it just didn't work because we're terrible puppeteers, it turns out, and you can't make eye contact with people, and it's just very, very difficult. So
Mhm.
yeah, so then we landed on the current form. I think we're more than 300 episodes in at this point. We do 2 a week, and we
Mhm.
talk to scientists, philosophers, anybody who has a really robust theory of something,
Mhm.
how
Mhm.
something works that's new that we haven't heard of before.
Mhm.
We'll bring them on and talk to
Mhm.
them.
Do you sometimes get into arguments, or the arguments continue after the show? Yes. That's-
Okay, so in the last month, Shilo and I got into an absolute like peeling paint off the walls argument about the nature of the electron, like whether the electron was an activity or an object, and where you can place the boundaries that allow you to treat it as an activity and not an object, and how, like, because Shiloh always has this example. He's like, look, in physics, there are static objects. And he always points, he's like, look at the table. The table is a static object. And I'm like, you have to understand that you've put the boundaries on this as a static object
Mhm.
that are commensurate with like human perception, and that if you zoom out long enough, that it's not a static object. And he's
Mhm.
like, but you can't do physics without that. And so that was a really funny argument. And then another one that we argue about consistently.
Eternal universe, eternal life, things like that. That was another recent one.
Mhm.
Yeah, because if
So
the Big
maybe
Bang
you don't
goes,
mind if I leave that out, the nature of the electron, and not get. There is an Italian saying, "Don't put the finger between a couple." So leave that argument. Don't take the side. Okay, the nature of the electron is a forbidden topic. I see. I realize.
we're still working it out. Yeah, I don't know what most couples argue about, but probably not the same things as us.
Uh,
The
uh,
eternity argument is another perennial favorite. I was in a really bad mood over something the other day, and Tyler was like, well, let's talk about something different. How about we talk about whether or not life is eternal? And there we were yet again. Do you want to present the eternal
Well, I'm
argument
just saying,
briefly?
like, if, one possibility, if the Big Bang falls apart, which it does seem to be falling apart, one possibility is a eternal universe. And given an eternal universe, is something like life, the phenomenon of life, just like the phenomenon of galaxies, is it an ever-present piece of the puzzle? Like, I'm not saying that there's always been an Earth that has had life forms that look like us on it, but is life always present? Therefore, the origin of life itself, maybe not the right question to ask. Maybe the origin of individual species or something like that is interesting. And Nastia was just unhappy with this.
I'm slowly coming around to your side of seeing things. I was just, as you were talking, I was thinking, one time I remember one of the first times that I spent the holidays with Shiloh's family, he and I got into a fight about how to define science, like in front of his parents. And I couldn't help myself. I still remember, just like, we were supposed to be watching a movie or something, and Shiloh and I are just
it's a
40
little bit
minutes
like
deep.
Big Bang Theory, no? The one guy cannot get married to the other because the one is a loop theorist and the other is a string.
It's actually really interesting because I feel like a lot of the project for talking about theories and the way that we codify the way we codify the best approach for encountering an idea that you might not agree with or you think is out there comes down to us trying to negotiate how to manage these massive fissures in the way that we see the world. Because it would
Mhm.
be terribly uninteresting if we saw the world exactly the same way. Like, I don't know what we'd talk about.
Mhm.
And we
Mhm.
really don't want to get into fights with people on the podcast,
Mhm.
because there are people we disagree with strongly. But the worst case scenario is making people like, if you just oppose somebody directly, it often ends the conversation, right? Especially
Yeah,
if it's a metaphysical divide, like
yeah.
whether you are comfortable with the idea of eternity or not. Some people they need a birth of the universe. Like, nothing makes sense to them otherwise. And
Mhm.
I don't think you're ever going to talk those people out of that. So we
Mhm.
have to learn how to talk about ideas and be curious about people's perspectives without, straight up arguing with them, I suppose.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
Yeah, that was one of my question also. How do you do that? How do you manage I mean, immersing yourself into the perspective of so different views and different people. I should add another compliment because you really, I mean, you're really capable of asking smart questions that, I mean, it gave me always the sensation that I was understood and you're trying hard to understand at least. And I think that's a really great ability. Not every it's a little bit separate from being a scientist or not. You also need to, yeah, you have certainly a great talent to interview people to take their perspective and what if, let's assume this is true. So what do you think? How we are going ahead? So yeah, I really appreciate that. But on the other hand, I wonder how do you manage all this obvious disagreement of all your guests you have in your shows? Because I mean, there are certainly people that I would argue with about the nature of cosmology or the nature of stars, and there is a lot of disagreement. But yeah, I mean, it's your job in a way to make people feel comfortable, but at the same time, yeah, it's a difficult line sometimes to walk, not to, as you said, push against the person you're interviewing too hard because it would just end the conversation. But on the other hand, you don't want to be too agreeable because that's not the purpose of science and not even popularizing science, right? So
Yeah, it's really hard. We've had it's only gone completely horribly twice to my recollection. I think most of it is what you said, and you're really good at it too, which is just trying to understand people and make sure that you can recount their ideas back to them in a way that they'll say exactly, right?
mm,
And so, one time, and actually the two times it's gone sideways, it was kind of an appeal to authority argument. It was kind of like, well, how dare you tell me something about the sun or tell me something about the Big Bang or something like that, where they're like, I'm the expert
they
and
say to you,
yeah, and
yeah,
so that's kind of I have a
mm,
hard time when people do that because I just find it to be the weakest possible,
mhm.
it's kind of just like
How dare you to think?
it's
Yeah.
it's like throwing your cards down and walking away from the game, basically, as far as I can tell. So, but for the
Mhm.
most part, people are cool and people don't do that. We've even had people we disagree with who are really open-minded and are like, "Wow, like I never thought of it that way." They're like, "I don't know if you're right about that, but that's a really interesting perspective."
Mhm.
So
So
it
maybe you
really,
should invite more particle mainstream particle physicists. You would get more of this stuff blown up in your. No, I mean, do you also invite purposefully mainstream scientists and challenge them a little bit about their? Yeah, I was thinking about inviting a particle physicist. She was very cool, and I saw her in another podcast, and so why not try? Yeah, do you try that, or what reaction do you get? Have you have people refused to talk to you because oh no, this channel is a channel of crackpots or heterodox people. I don't want to go there, or
It's a
just no
pretty
response.
it's a pretty delicate balance. And so we've always tried to maintain a sufficient, I think that maybe we should coin the term like crackpot ratio, the CR. We need to
Mhm.
make sure that our crackpot ratio to mainstreamer is not more than maybe like 3 crackpots for every 1 mainstreamer. And I use crackpots like tongue firmly in cheek because I think
and
that
mainstreamer too, because there's people at MIT and Harvard who have really far out ideas, and their colleagues think that they're crackpots too.
Mhm.
So which
it's true.
the only
All
problem
is
is that
relative. Yeah, yeah.
like a lot of people in the academy, like I would still work in the academy, I still teach at the university. A lot of people in the academy are really, really concerned about their public facing image, and they're so cautious that you think they're really interesting when you talk to them before the show, but as soon as you turn the camera on, they just clam up and they won't play with any ideas, and it just isn't fun at all. So, you know, we
Mhm.
we have
We should
we
we
have
should
some
coin a
aversion.
test. We should name a test after this. How does the person react? The difference in reaction with the camera turned on and turned off.
It's hard. It's hard to be yourself on camera. Like I feel like it's something you always can get better at is just trying to forget all the lights and cameras and just be yourself. Like that's the infinite game. That's the horizon. It's just
Mhm.
I think it's really, really hard for everybody.
But I think that maintaining an open curiosity is helpful because, like you said, the search for understanding is something that almost every scientist can get behind. And so I find that there's a delicate path to walk of making sure that the person feels like the best version of their argument has been presented. Like, that's the place you start for a particle physicist, for a big banger, for somebody who's studying black holes, whatever, the place that you have to start from is the common ground where everybody understands and agrees upon what the model is. And sometimes that can be kind of boring for an audience that's already tired of the established model. And that's kind of a piece of audience capture that is inherent in YouTube and all of these public facing projects, which is that, yes, the project is born out of my curiosity about nature, but I'm speaking to people that have a set of things that they are already interested in. And so the difficulty isn't just recruiting people to come to the show, it's also getting people that listen to the show to pay attention to a presentation by somebody who they consider to be too conventional for their tastes or telling them
Mhm.
something that they already know.
I
Mhm.
also like it seems like the most interesting stuff always happens in the second half of the interview
Mm.
because the first half is doing this process, which is making
Interesting.
sure they understand that we understand them. And so it's a very difficult thing to market because the first half tends to be the more boring of the two halves, if I was going to say that, just because it's very standard. We're walking through their ideas, checking them, making sure everybody's on the same page, and then we can start to actually, investigate the logic or the
Dig deeper.
assumptions
Mhm.
behind the ideas, but it takes a little while to get there, unfortunately.
Very interesting. Yeah. Hmm.
Do you have a similar experience with the people that you speak to on the show, on your show?
Well, recently I've been interviewing people I know also, a little bit off the mainstream, like Lopez Corredera, but he's not even off the mainstream. Or like people like Mike McCulloch. Um, but well, I try, of course, I try also to interview big names. I have interviewed for Nobel laureates. I always boast with this. You can be the next Nobel laureate if you come to my show. And yeah, to be fair, actually, couple of these guys did not realize I was such a science critic. So one of them was David Gross about particle physics, and I let him. Yeah, I asked the naive questions. What do you think about? Don't you agree with Einstein about this and that? And yeah, letting him slide a little bit into the traps, so to speak. No, I wasn't. I don't think I was. I was unfair. However, did not realize how much I, yeah, was critical and skeptical of particle physics. So slowly, I walked a little bit to more uncomfortable questions, which was well visible yeah, in his face. And at the very end, when I mentioned the book by Andrew Pickering, excellent book about particle physics, but a horrible story for a diehard believer in the standard model, he was really disgusted and visibly annoyed. Yeah, when so yeah, but that's sometimes a risk you have to take. And well, very yeah, but people. I think it's nonetheless. I still. I treated him very respectfully, and as I said, you have also as a critic, you have to realize that not all these folks following the standard model are just twerps or are stupid. That's not true. And I'm a big fan of yeah, being able to talk to everybody. If you go to the political podcasters, I very much like, for instance, Lex Friedman, who has a very talks to very, very different people, which are enemies uh, each other, like, I don't know, Zuckerberg and Musk or whoever. Yeah. But he's able to, I mean, he's able to develop really friendly conversations and take out a lot of content of these. I think that's a big accomplishment. And I don't think there is dishonesty in this approach if you really try to develop empathy and to put yourself into the shoes of your opponent, or not even opponent here. That's a good thing. And yeah, in science we should strive for that also, to, I mean, being able to talk. Well, my personal experience is, of course, rarely you find okay, at least in particle physics, it's kind of difficult really to get people to the microphone and talk openly. That's where you often find the appeal to authority and do you think 3,000 people are stupid? We're working all this, and this has been checked multiple times, and we have a reputation to lose, and all this stuff. So yeah, it would be nice if there is more general, more open discussion. And yeah, I think podcasts like yours and the internet, of course, in general, contributes to that development, which is a healthy thing and a healthy counterbalance to the conventional academic publishing and journals, and many important voices get lost here. Yeah.
Which is why I think the in-person events are really, really important, and hopefully among the most important things we do through this podcast too, because I think the way that people behave when they're actually together and they practice this method that we're talking about, this open reception and this ability to steelman each other's perspectives and really understand each other before getting critical, I think that's easier when you can actually spend time with people, which is why I'm so freaking excited for this conference this summer in Portugal, where we're bringing together, you know, people who are on different sides of this Big Bang discussion, like genuinely different poles of the discussion. And I think that all of the interactions so far have been really, you know, friendly and respectful. And I think it's hopefully going to set a model for how this could unfold with other conferences in the future for people who are discussing difficult subjects that they disagree about.
We will not call the police in Portugal, you think?
Fingers
No, I'm
crossed.
really looking forward to this event. Yeah, I wanted to mention this to my audience. You should go to I put the link in the description, but there is a really great conference organized by you two. You already organized a conference last year, right, in the United States? It was when the solar eclipse was. But yeah, we have a cosmology conference in Portugal with dissident voices and voices from yeah, with very different perspectives. And I think that's also my experience. Somehow it makes a big difference, the personal encounter. To a degree, I mean, we can also simulate that in Zoom meetings and podcast discussions. It certainly it's something that goes beyond just a publication, just a paper. Yeah, I already noted that's when I said that when I first saw a lecture by Pierre-Marie Robitaille. He was so convincing in this talk about the sun. So I had read his papers, but it's like it's so difficult to get at this intuitive judgment that also is a valuable kind of evaluation of somebody's research. So certainly the video, and I think this is it's going to be an important part of science, but the personal encounter is still another thing on top. And yeah, it certainly enhances civilized discussion. I mean, what we have at the internet, all these outrage on social media. It's part of the problem is that people are not face to face responsible for, yeah, being civilized in their manners. So it's much easier to offend people online, and it's very different. I think even if you meet person to person, you are automatically more respectful. Yeah, treat a person
We
with.
set up a part of this conference too. It's designed in a kind of unique way, which is that the afternoons are completely free. And I
Mhm,
think that we did that so that perhaps the theorists can spend time privately where they're not under the pressure of performing on a stage, and they
mhm,
can perhaps make more headway in those private spaces, take walks on the beach,
mhm,
do whatever they want to do. And then when we have the public sessions, there will hopefully be progress made in between, you know,
mhm,
the arms of the day like that.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, he's still wrong, but he's so funny.
Exactly. There's a tenderness that comes from it that I think is missing from everybody being on stage or being recorded or being the center of attention, where I think that there's a tremendous amount of evidence in history that scientists corresponded with one another and tried to figure out the answers to these questions in a way that wasn't in their public-facing personas. And that's available to some degree, but I think that the history of the Solvay conferences, all of these massive historical events where people came together to really inquire deeply about the nature of reality, that hasn't been carried forward into the present. And so the
Mhm,
people that are curious about these subjects don't have an opportunity to get together. Because if you go to a cosmology conference, this was actually very funny. I was watching, when you go to a cosmology conference, you don't get to talk about the underlying assumptions that go into the conference. Like, I was trying to find a topic to email Sean Carroll about. So Sean Carroll,
mhm,
physicist, very popular, writes a
mhm,
lot of books, has a podcast, and when we request people to come on the podcast, we always do some background research to figure out what we could possibly talk to them about. And I came up with this video of him at the Institute of Art and Ideas. I think it was like 6 or 7 years ago, and he's on stage talking about the Big Bang. And he opens his presentation by saying that, well, if you doubt the Big Bang, we don't let you on stage here. This is something that you're not welcome at this conference about the future of ideas if you doubt this fundamental precept. And I'm like, can you imagine if the Solvay conference was based around the same principle, where it's like, well, if you doubt the interpretation of quantum mechanics, you're not welcome here? Like, it just
mhm,
seems so fundamentally antithetical to the way that science should be done, and that we're
mhm,
really trying to fix because it doesn't seem possible anywhere else.
mhm,
And so we're
mhm.
very excited that you're going to be there, and Eric Lerner, and Corredora, and Aziz, and
Gareth, so many
Yeah,
people, yeah.
yeah, it's going to be
yeah.
really good.
Well, there's a couple of reasons why these Solvay conferences are not repeatable in modern science, I think. Well, to begin with, science is too fragmented today. I mean, there are too many specialists. I mean, all the participants of the Solvay conferences, they were generalists. I mean, they would discuss cosmology and particle physics at the same time. Today, particle physicists cannot even discuss with the cosmologists because they lack the technical terms to communicate with each other. So it's really a totally different thing. Yeah, and I mean these conferences back then were really interesting. Even if I mean the 27th Solvay conference was in a way also a failure, a point in history where, yeah, science got stuck in a dead end, maybe because quantum physics became too difficult. I don't know. Um, but yeah, it's certainly also a pity that we don't have. I mean, it would be tremendously interesting if they had recordings of discussions on YouTube. Yeah, imagine that. Dirac discussing with Bohr and Lorentz. translating the
There's
languages.
some pretty good transcripts available. There were reporters there for a lot of it. You
Yeah.
can.
Okay.
There's a fantastic book I've been reading by this gentleman Adam Kay, who I hope we'll have on the podcast soon, called
Mhm.
Beyond Shadow Physics, and it's just this fantastic historical. It's just, it's rich with quotes from these actual conferences and reporters who are noting everybody's behaviors too, like
Mhm.
the mannerisms of Bohr. Like he sort of wins this debate, but you can tell in his behavior
That's
that he's
interesting. Okay.
disappointed that Einstein
Mm-hmm.
doesn't really buy his argument, and it's very,
Mm-hmm.
very interesting. Because of course
Mm-hmm.
they were taking these long walks together outside of
Mm-hmm.
the microphone, outside of the conference hall, and there was a lot of information to be gleaned about what was happening just by watching the way that people acted to one another. It's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, didn't know about that. I mean, I have this book by my co-author Sheila Jones. She wrote a book about the Solvay conference, the Quantum 10, which I thought was the most detailed account available. But yeah, maybe this is historically very interesting. Yeah. So one thing I wanted to address is one difficulty you certainly face is that, I mean, you're talking to a lot of critics of mainstream scientists pursuing their ideas. And yeah, there is something I sometimes call the tragedy of heterodox scientists. We are united in the sense that, let's say, okay, the standard model, you can't be serious about all this stuff of free parameters. That's obviously we're heading towards new epicycles. So you can make this argument. It's very convincing to, yeah, a lot of people, let's say. But on the other hand, if you then try to say, oh, let's make something together, write a paper, and what's the alternative? It turns out that, yeah, 10 different people have 15 different theories, and we are anything but unified at this point. So this is, yeah, but inevitable, but it's a tragedy. And I think that's maybe this is the reason why mainstream science always, yeah, is ahead or in funding or whatever, because I mean, you don't give money to people who disagree, right? So if people agree, then you have this reinforcing net of opinions. And how do you, I mean, as you said, you certainly have your disagreements, but how do you deal with this? Many heterodox ideas contradicting each other. So one day you talk to this guy, and the other day you talk to a guy with the exact opposite view of the universe, of life, of chemistry, of AI dangers. I don't know.
It's a good question, and at least some of it, I think, comes down to a philosophy of what does it let you do?
What is?
What does it let you do? What does your idea allow you to do in the world? And so we get people who send us their mathematical theories of everything all of the time. And I'm like, I'm not sure that you can really sit down and totally differentiate between the various mathematical theories of everything and their ability to encompass some next layer of reality in some unique way, because that's just kind of what mathematics does. You define your parameters slightly differently, you shape your window a little bit off from the person who's next to you, and you come up with a different model. And so I'm like, I think that you can differentiate between those on the basis of, does it allow you to achieve some kind of new technology? Does it allow you to move into the future in a way, Shilo?
I don't think it has to be about technology, but yeah, does it make something easier in terms of
Mm,
understanding the universe? Like, there is a way to objectively evaluate, I think, the power of a theory, but I don't totally think that's what we're trying to do. Like, in some sense, I feel like we are trying to reinvigorate the spirit of the Royal Society, which is, hey, let's just put these ideas side by side and see which one shakes out. It's kind of a different project. I remember in one of the meetings we had recently for this conference, Eric Lerner said something really profound where he was like, we're not trying to replace the old dogma with a new dogma. that's kind of the worst possible situation, is that because the nature of science is progressive. You're always learning new things about the universe. You're always putting together new connections. And so you want a science that's sufficiently flexible that it can adjust to new information. You don't want something that's so flimsy that you can't stand on it either. So it's a real balancing act between being open-minded enough to entertain disparate ideas, but not being so open-minded that your brains fall out of your head. I think that you have to really cultivate that balance.
Which
Hmm.
is why perhaps technology isn't the right word, but I think that the question of what does it let you do? What does your theory let you do can be expanded to, okay, well, how many dots does it allow you to connect in a way that lets you make sense of the world in a way that was better than before? Does your theory stand alone on some pinnacle completely unconnected to everything else? Or is it some way of being able to see a little bit clearer the many facets of nature that can then be connected to some other facet that now lets you see in 3 dimensions as opposed to just seeing some flat illustration?
Yeah, like the cool thing about Pierre's work, for instance, is that, he has these ideas about the sun, but then all of a sudden it allows him to explain things about white dwarves and about the CMB and all of these pieces that seemed unrelated before Pierre got to them, right? And whether he's right or not is sort of beside the question of, is it a powerful theory if it is true? And the answer is absolutely yes, it is. And then you can start to unpack the assumptions that go into it, and people have to make up their own minds about whether they think it's a good theory or not. But it is certainly an impactful idea if true.
Mhm.
And
Oh,
to
yeah.
to add to that, I think that there's a real challenge in being able to work without consensus. Like you're saying, like the mainstream has consensus and it lets them move in a really goal-directed way. And I have a feeling that you're not going to do away with consensus because there's a deep unease that comes from having to question everything at all times. And so when you have a paradigm that's ill-fitting and starting to fray at the edges, it it's reasonable that you're going to have a period where there's all of these, just a zoo of different options where everybody's arguing over what the better paradigm might be. And then gradually it starts to harmonize and to create something that where the different pieces resonate with each other well enough to be constructed into a new paradigm. And the job is to be able to recognize that that paradigm too will one day fall. Like you make a paradigm not to put a statue in the desert that a million years from now someone will look at and be like, wow, they were so right. How amazing. You do it just for
Well,
long enough until somebody to come around and to
yeah,
say, hey, this is better.
okay, but if well, I would say, okay, correct, but the idea is then, of course, your new paradigm, whatever it is, it hasn't to be a dogma, but it's a better paradigm than the previous one. That's the idea of science. You just don't, yeah,
Absolutely.
jump around randomly. You're supposed to converge to the truth if that exists. So, and yeah, but of course, these paradigm changes are big things. It's revolutions, are really painful changes in people's mind, and they occur on all time scales. Yeah, you have 5 years of nuclear physics going around before the eventual discovery of the nuclear fission, and you have 1,500 years geocentric astronomy going the wrong way, and phlogiston theory 75. You have all these time scales, and that's so it's yeah. You mentioned before flexibility, but it's two-sided. Yeah, it's double-edged. You don't want that flexibility, that a theory that encompasses everything, because you're so flexible that you always can a parameter. That's what you have today with the standard models. Yeah.
Well, not a flexibility of the theories themselves, but a flexibility of the culture that's able to entertain things that go against the
Hmm.
grain of the established ideas without just freaking out and burning people at the stakes because it's
Hmm.
heresy.
Yeah.
That's more the
Yeah,
flexibility we're talking
you
about.
easily get there, and that's what surely happened also to Pierre Marie. I mean, there is one common denominator in his findings. I mean, he had a really deep insight about his critique of Kirchhoff's law is really profound. And it's so important and it's so basic in thermodynamics that you just have to take that seriously. And as a consequence, then, yeah, we know he challenged the solar model, which is also very reasonable. And I wrote a book about this. And at the same time, I mean, he's just a honest guy and doesn't hide things. So he went straight ahead and said, okay, the next thing I'm gonna attack is the cosmic microwave background, because people are talking here about black body too. And and his analysis is again very detailed. I think Gareth will talk about this at the conference also. And so there are really hard questions to ask these guys about especially about the data cleaning and how to remove backgrounds and all these technicalities, if this is really done the right way. But of course, I mean, if you challenge this wonderful top result of cosmology, you make cosmologists freak out. They just won't digest it. And I'm not I mean, as far as I appreciate his critique, and I believe that a lot of dirty things have been done in not properly removing background and so on and so forth, I'm not sure if I would totally challenge the existence, as he does, by suggesting that there is a signal from the oceans that might explain it. So, but I just don't know. I'm not in the position to. But one thing is, you have to take that seriously, because it's good science, and you need a thorough analysis. So we drifted a little bit up in. So yeah, a lot of I'm looking forward also to this conference, because there are different people with different views. And Eric Lerner is also a famous critic. Not sure I will agree with everything. I think he's a little bit also with Halton Arp in that direction. Yeah, I met Halton Arp many years ago.
Where did you meet him?
Yeah, he worked back then at the Max Planck Institute for Extraterrestrials Astrophysics in Munich, which is close to where I live. And yeah, really a gentleman. Yeah. But also, just to give a little example how the sociology works, when I met him, so we were in contact in email, so let's meet on Thursday at 3 o'clock and so. And he said, well, let's go in this room. If I go to the cafeteria, the young scientists feel uncomfortable if they are seen with me. Let that sink in, okay? The atmosphere at an institute where people, it's not viewed, if in how do you say, it's not appreciated if you are together at the cafeteria with Halton Arp, because Halton Arp might poison your views about what we believe, what we know to be is true about the universe.
It's been going on for a long, long time. There's some letters in the newspaper about when Thomas Young, the wave theory gentleman from several hundred years ago, he was just ridiculed by the mainstream press for going against Newton's corpuscular notions. I mean, just brutally, like people just treating him like, who do you think you are going against Newton? It's unbelievable to read these quotes. It's just, it's worse than what you would, it's like Professor Dave level stuff. And of course, Thomas Young is one of the most incredible minds ever, as far as I can tell. And so
and this links me to something else that I hope that we manage to accomplish over the course of our lives, which is to disentangle science from belief. Because we hear a lot of times people saying that they believe in science, and what that means is that they believe in the conclusions that science has arrived at. not necessarily that there is an eternally receding horizon of what qualifies as truth, and we will continuously seek it and eternally fall short. And so I really want the work that we do and the conversations that we have and the ideas that we entertain to really remind people that the worst possible scenario is Halton Arp being at an institute where young scientists can't talk to him, or somebody challenges Newton and is mocked ceaselessly in the newspapers, or somebody like Pierre comes up with a model for how stars actually work and no one will listen and nobody will even cite him despite the fact that he has such a wealth of knowledge. Like this is maybe the most dangerous thing.
By the way the reason they were ridiculing him was because he was a physician, not a physicist, right? And the same
What
thing happens to
nonsense.
Pierre.
It's the exact same thing that happened to Alfred Wegener with his continental drift. Oh, he's a meteorologist. He doesn't understand anything about geology. We would have to start over and go back 70 years in geology if Wegener was right. Yeah, you had to start over.
And there's just case after case after case of this. It's unbelievable that people wouldn't grasp by now that oftentimes revolutions come from outside of a discipline, because one of the traps of being deep inside of a particular field is that you become accustomed to the paradigm. Perhaps you develop blind spots. And so, of course, you're going to get these really radical ideas coming from people who aren't inside of those fields. And it's almost like you should expect that.
I am very optimistic that this is starting to change. I think
Mhm.
that we have entered.
You
I,
are.
I I am. I am. I think it has to, because if it doesn't, I think that we lose something that is so valuable. Like humans didn't always have science. This is a project that's maybe 500 years old, if that.
I think COVID went a long way to showing people that the scientists can be wrong about stuff. I feel like the wider public has opened their minds up a little bit to the idea that huge misconceptions can happen about like what the nature of immunization actually means, and you know,
I
just
mean, you're
very,
correct. That's evidence, yes, but it's not that now a revolution happened that swept away the old beliefs and yeah, there's
You
still
gotta you gotta take into account
very
that these
resilient.
things,
Yeah.
it is a resilient paradigm, but I think that these shifts take decades. I think we're 5 years away from the beginning of the shift. And where we'll be 20 years from now, as that all rearranges and grows, I think will be unrecognizable to us the same way that it's unrecognizable to us the way that people believed in phlogiston theory.
I mean, it's something kind of crazy happened to me because I interviewed for this job to teach this cosmology course at the university. And when I got the job, I was in the interview with the chair of the physics department, and I was like, "Look, I'm not sure the Big Bang happened." I figured that would be the end of the interview, right? I just realized I couldn't do it otherwise, right? I'm not going to just sit there, and I'm going to at least bring up these other ideas that I'm keenly aware of. I'm not going to try to say these are the correct ideas, but I'm at least tell the students about them. And to my complete shock, the lady who was interviewing was like, "Great, that's interesting. Why don't like you can present both sides of the story?" And I had no intention of getting the job. Like I didn't even plan on it for that year because I didn't think there was any way they would hire me to do this.
Hmm.
And and that's what I do in my course now is I compare all of these different perspectives, and nobody's fired me yet. And so for me, that's like it's not Columbia University. It's not this fancy school, but it is a sign that the academic institutions are at least tolerant enough to entertain a discussion with their undergraduates about these things, which I would have never thought was possible before I started into this. So that gives me some optimism personally.
And I
Hmm.
also want to add, lest I know that this might make things a little bit too legible, which maybe I'll regret later, but I think that the alternative has to become cool. Like, I think that there is a cultural fascination with the professor with the leather elbow patches who's at some Ivy League school who's telling you about things that are incomprehensible, and you just have to sit there and be like, wow, it's so complex. No one can understand. That's amazing. I think that it's possible for the alternative to be much cooler, where no, actually, the thing that's meaningful is if you do understand, and that the world is legible, and that the theories that people present to you, if they don't make sense, sure, you have to do the work to understand them. But if somebody's telling you, well, this isn't meant to be understood, that's not cool. Like you shouldn't do that. That's a bad way to encounter nature. And I think that's if you can shift that, if you can shift people's alignment towards what they like versus what they don't like, the rest follows naturally.
Yeah, it's an optimistic thought. Yeah, you correctly mentioned that part of the problem is the admiration of some people admiring their own non-understanding. If they understood, they wouldn't admire it any longer. So it's this kind of incomprehensibility that attracts somehow these science believers. Oh, science is so great. I don't believe it,
Mm.
but oh, so great. Yeah, that's certainly part of the problem. Regarding a general paradigm, well, we should specify what is a paradigm shift. I mean, do we mean all science? Do we mean biology? Do we mean all of physics, particle physics, cosmology? You're revising the Big Bang. You're revising. I mean, you could a paradigm shift following Pierre Marie with solar physics without. Okay, let's say okay, it has influence on the stars, but without revolutionizing particle physics. Let's say. Um, a paradigm shift we're in the standard model of particles. So I think I'm kind of pessimistic a little bit because there is one aspect. People become smarter, and one by one you can convince people that sometimes the diehard believers become skeptics when they age, but at the same time people get older. The critics just die out. So what I observe is that if you, yeah, I have a real physics talk with Mike Disney, great astronomer uh, from Bristol. No, I'm mixing up the towns anyway. Yeah, um, Mike Disney is a really knowledgeable, the discoverer of the what was it, the pulsar in the Crab Nebula. Really great guy, and he's so critical of astronomy and current cosmology. But yeah, he doesn't need the funding. He can think, promote his own thoughts. But yeah, it's a sad story. But people just die out, and the gravitational waves critic Andrew D. Jackson, yeah, great scientists, had a great conversation with him, but yeah, unfortunately, his group dissolves. So you see all these good structures just dissolving and replaced by, yeah, career scientists that need funding, that need to rehash the mainstream. So it's just, yeah, there is some dynamics in convincing people or becoming more skeptic, but it's the dynamic has to be faster than the biological factor, and I don't see this. Yeah.
That's why it's so important that fringe scientists or heterodox thinkers learn how to talk really well. They need to learn how to clarify their ideas, present their ideas in the
Mm.
most succinct and understandable way, because I think that you're right. Science will progress a funeral at a time as long as the new generation is aware of new ideas. And the only way they're going to be aware of ideas is if they're legible. Like we're trying this really fun little program at our show right now where we do speed science basically. We invite anybody to sign up, like literally any theorist who wants can sign up, and we randomly pull people out of a hat and they have 1 minute to present their theory. That's it. It's like an abstract. You get 1 minute. And then, we'll interview them afterwards for maybe like 10, 15 minutes. But the idea is that we really want to encourage people and help them make their ideas legible. We want people in the next generation, especially young people, to learn how to present their work in a way that other people can actually follow. Because
Mm.
that's one thing. If we got anything out of grad school, it was that presentation is priority. Like we would just work on our presentations. Both of our advisors were just beating us to get these presentations dialed in, you know, trimming all the fat out of it, no extra information on slides, just really, really honing the presentation. And I think that that's one thing that the academy really excels at. The mainstream really excels at that at the highest level, especially in these journals like Nature and Science, these ones that everybody, you know, fawns over, is the presentations are slick. They're really, really, really trimmed down and beautiful presentations. And if the heterodox thinkers could learn how to do that, I think that progress would unfold a lot faster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was skeptical at the beginning, but now I agree with you because I mean, obviously 1 minute is not enough to go into depth about justifying the theory. But what you can do is listen to 10 presentations and then, okay, that 2 or 3 convinced me the most. And then I go deeper and I listen another 5 minutes of that one and I take the most convincing one and so on. And there you have a reasonable, yeah, that's that.
And you can get better at it too. That's the big thing. It's like in my own work, I've noticed that when I first started off presenting ideas, I would have a really hard time explaining them to people. Even my own research projects, just I would, you know, get lost, or I'd be like, oh, this person doesn't have the technical knowledge necessary, and I would kind of blame it on them for not understanding. But what I realized is that it was entirely under my control. Like if I really found a way to understand my own ideas really, really well, then I could streamline them into whatever language was necessary for the person that I was presenting it to. And so I feel like it's something that, you know, you really can improve at in a way that maybe your theory is terrible, but you could, and you can't fix that other than coming up with a new theory. But you can make a theory more legible. You can make it more understandable. And I mean, that just feeds back in spades, because once it's legible, then people can give you feedback. You can tailor your understanding as a result of it. Oh, wait, maybe I am actually missing some links between these two things. But if you're not understandable, then there's no way to get feedback or help or anything, no way to collaborate, because you're just incomprehensible.
So there's been a bunch of conversations that we've had with this guy Jim Keller, who is a computer architect who's actually one of the patrons for the conference. He wanted to meet you and Gareth and Pierre, and so he gave us the starting funds to be able to put it on. And one of the things that he always talks about is that institutions die, right? He's worked at AMD, he's worked at Tesla, he's worked at Apple, he's been in the tech sphere for his entire career. And so he's watched these behemoths get born, mature, live for a little while, and then die. And he's like, this is just the nature of things. And so he's very pessimistic about the ability for humans to come up with a long-standing institution. But something that he's less pessimistic about is the idea of mission. And I think the mission of our project and the mission of the future is exactly what Shilo's saying, is to make things legible. Because once it is legible, you can hold it in your head and you can turn it around and you can squish it around and try to fit it with other things. But if it's this nebulous, mysterious thing that you can never really fully grasp, you can never get to the next stage. And so if there was one point, if there was one thing that I'm really excited about, is that I think that the era where everybody has a microphone and is able to broadcast their ideas into the world is an era of legibility, where I think that that is actually possible. And if that's possible, then other grand things will follow off of the back of it.
Okay, one take-home message I will take from our conversation is I will think about a 1 minute convincing presentation. Look, consider fundamental constants. That's the real road to physics.
You should come out and do one at one of our paradigm drifts. We do these every month, so we've recorded the first one. We have the next one scheduled, but we should get you out sometime. It's really fun. We've invited former podcast guests for.
I'm bad in preparing. I'm also a lazy person. Yeah, because I work as a teacher, so I have to do so much presentation. So I'm also used to do it spontaneously. So I don't prepare very much my scientific presentation either. So this is, but yeah, sometimes it's worth investing. Yeah. Well, one aspect I wanted to bring up, because we're talking about science in general and scientific revolutions. There's always been much interaction between science and technology. And I mean, this holds for general history. I mean, at the very end, not the single bad guys in history are relevant, or not even the wars. They started what at the end counts is the technological development that influences also the balance of power and so on. And I think there is a big connection back to science too in technology. The way how we do science is heavily influenced by our technological possibilities. One little example I always mention, had Dirac and Einstein and Dickey had the possibility to find their respective papers in the library or with a keyword search at the internet, their story would have taken a totally entire path, right? So this is just one little thing, or a special aspect of the internet and search engines. And what I would hope for can make a change in the current paradigm, which is stuck in a dead end, is artificial intelligence. I really believe this will make a difference, because on the one hand side, you have this unhealthy growth, exponential growth of publications, and people are trying to make sense of this with H indexes and all this nonsensical stuff of evaluation, because you can't evaluate real science. There's no way to objectively evaluate it. Yeah, AI could make a difference, because I mean, AI will write papers, I think, will read papers, and there will be an enormous, also unpredictable turnaround how science is performed. So I really hope that one day we might arrive at objectively, openly working on the raw data, for instance, and trying entirely different approaches from the standard models or the conventional wisdom. And this is the hope I have. I almost have lost. Yeah, maybe this is too pessimistic, but yeah, I'm doing this for a while, you know. having the hope for. I once it was like 15 years ago. I predicted to my colleagues, you know, there were all these anomalies out there challenging the idea of dark matter. I predict that dark matter, the idea of dark matter, will die in the next decade. You're wrong. Simply wrong. Maybe it's even more firmly established than back then. People, I mean, the PhD students in astronomy will tell you with all their conviction, no, we know for sure we have new independent evidence for dark matter now in this and this and this and this. Strange story.
It's hard to say when. I think putting a date prediction on these things is really difficult. I mean, the AIs aren't there yet, for sure. I'm also optimistic that they will be able to take all these reams of data and pull out new connections, but at present, they're not very good at creating new concepts. So they're not very good at finding discrepancies and ideas and providing paths towards a future solution, which I think is what's unique about the human mind, is that we're very intolerant of discrepancies in our knowledge base. I think it's kind of the root of our curiosity, and the root of what makes us artists and scientists, is that we see things that don't jive together and we try to come up with the connection that will fix that problem. Whereas the AI seems very good at just...
point. That's an excellent point. Now continue.
I just think the AI is very good at telling you what people already think right now. It's not good at making those curiosities. It's very tolerant of contradictions in knowledge bases. And you can point it out to the chat GPT or whatever, right? You can be like, hey, wait, like I was talking to chat GPT about, I don't know, about the CMB this morning, because I'm getting ready to do a lecture on the CMB. And you know, I was asking about different measurement systems and kind of working through a lot of the things that Pierre's brought up already, like they haven't actually measured the monopole at L2. And like, it will agree to those eventually, but it doesn't make those connections on its own. It doesn't realize the CMB hasn't actually been measured at L2, but it thinks, and you can always talk it into it, but it doesn't remember that it's been talked into it. It doesn't have any long-term ability to reconceptualize something once that logical.
Maybe it will come. Yeah, but yeah,
Yeah,
you're correct. Yeah.
I hope so.
It's a very good point. That's Michael, that's the best critique I've heard of II so far.
He's
Yeah,
been
because
honing that
I
one for
mean
a while.
I discuss a lot AI with people, and there's also very superficial arguments. No, we humans will be always, but that's a good point. That's really a fair point. The too much tolerance of discrepancy, and also I like also the idea of science being, yeah, the core of science being sensible to these discrepancies and trying to eliminate them.
Yeah, I think it might have just to do with the architecture of the systems. Like I have enough friends who are working on these programs and family members and through conversations on the podcast to have a little bit of a grip on how it works. But I think that its inability to reform its long-term memory about its conceptual landscape in the face of being presented with solutions to discrepancy is part of the architectural flaw with the system. Like it's not capable of updating its priors once it learns about a new connection. Like it'll agree with you and be like, oh, that's a really good point, actually. But then you come back the next day in a new context window and be like, hey, remember what we were talking, it won't, if you're signing with a new account or something, like it's not going to remember that it learned that yesterday, even though it is a logical conclusion that follows from the steps that you walk it through.
Yeah,
But
I
I
mean,
think that when they design systems that are capable of managing paradigms, which they are working on, they're trying, because right now it's, you know, word completion. And it's word completion that works really well, and it's indexed on all of human knowledge, but it doesn't hold in its mind the relationship between systems of ideas. And once you have that, when it's trained on a scientific corpus and these ideas are linked to each other this at a higher level, like, because right now it's words that are related to one another. And now, if you could go one step higher and say, okay, well, these concepts are nested relative to one another, then the machine would actually be able to say, oh, that's interesting. These concepts all appear to point in different directions. And so there's these orthogonal views that emerge from the scientific literature. And so I think that there is great reason to be optimistic that if this next level gets built, what we will have is we'll have somebody who's able to see through the opaque scientific language, through the opaque mathematical treatment of things, to be able to say that, like, hey, this paper says they're looking at this, but what they're actually looking at is this. And when you combine it with these other three papers, it would appear that the thing that we're actually seeing out in space isn't a black hole the way that we conceive of it, but is something else entirely. But we're a ways away from that. Like, I think that
Yeah, it's a
that's
totally different architecture. That is not the way these machines are built right now. They rescan the entire body of human knowledge every single time, from what I understand. So it's
well,
not.
you might have a very good point. There is even one funny guy making it's called on YouTube gaslighting ChatGPT with ethical dilemmas. Very
that's awesome.
funny. Alex O'Connor, very funny. Um, yeah, I mean, it's basically also the point you make because it's too tolerant to discrepancies. But well, I would doubt that it's a problem as a matter of principle of the architecture. I mean, of course, it doesn't include every conversation right now. It doesn't include. It has. I mean, only a tiny, tiny fraction of the scientific literature has been fed into the knowledge base so far, I guess. So I think,
But there's stuff that's
yeah, I
missing
mean,
from the knowledge base. And there's
hmm?
stuff that's in the knowledge base that's like the sun absolutely, definitely is not a liquid 100%. Everybody who says so is stupid. And so then when you ask Chat about it, Chat's like, yeah, that's a really dumb idea. And then you keep asking it and you keep prodding it. And eventually it comes around to the fact of like, well, in light of that new perspective, perhaps it's not that terrible of an idea, but it's been trained on the fact that the reputable literature says that this idea can't possibly be correct. And it's that way for all ideas that are unpopular.
So
That's, I
you're
think, the
saying
problem.
that this is the basic shortcoming of the models, because that's what I do. I discuss these models. I mean, that's what I just put out a discussion about the liquid sun model with ChatGPT, and he's
Saw
very
that.
hesitant. He really disagrees. But I had also another conversation in which I said, like, okay, so let's assume that we need to restart physics about from about 1930. And let's assume that, because I mean, obviously you're trained with all this stuff, but there are some indications that we are on a wrong path, like in the geocentric model. And imagine yourself, you are trained at the Middle Ages with all the back then knowledge of the geocentric model. How would you respond? And somehow he was able to take that perspective. Yeah. So
So it just needs to be able to update that to a wider web of conclusions that it's drawing constantly, because people are leading it to these revelations all over the place all the time, but it has no way of feeding that back to a central memory. And so there's no progress in the knowledge base of the system as a result of these revelations that it's having.
But
It's not impossible. I think that can happen for sure. I would even imagine people are working on it, but it just
But
doesn't seem to.
why do you know what makes you so convinced of that? I mean, I'm not thinking they will learn now from take all my wisdom and improve ChatGPT. They will apply to your question next time. But on the other hand, I think it would be wise for the model makers also to, I mean, to use the data. I mean, they're using the data somehow. Why not?
I think that there's some concern with privacy where it's unclear if they're able to use the conversations that you've had with it privately in order to then be able to feed back into the next training run. Because right now, the way that the information inside of the model is established is that they train it on the corpus of literature, and then they go through this process that people call jiggling, which is that they ask it to complete some sentence, and then it completes it incorrectly, and then the training run basically changes the mathematical relationships between words until it's capable of finishing the sentence correctly. And so once that's done, the model has its internal map of how things relate to one another. And so you can have a conversation with it, but its knowledge base doesn't change until they do another training run. And so
Mhm.
when they go back, and so as they release new models, it's I think that the improvement of the models is not necessarily on new training runs. Like they're not going back to scratch and saying, okay, well, we have to index the entirety of the internet and then also add in everything that people have said, because if they have your user data
Mhm.
too, imagine that, uh, imagine the prime minister is like asking ChatGPT about some like weird growth that they have. And then that gets folded into the training run. And so now when you're like, hey, does the prime minister have any weird growths? It turns out that you can learn about his toenail fungus or something. Like I think that that's a legitimate issue with
I
these
Yeah,
think it'd
yeah.
be
things.
easy as
We
heck to
can
solve
discuss
the.
whether we like to be politicians to be replaced by a model. I mean, in some cases, it wouldn't be a bad
Mm.
idea, I guess. Yeah.
But you could just have a button that pops up like submit this revelation to the central
I do like that.
database.
I do like that.
And then it does, and it can be compared against other revelations. And
Mhm.
I don't know. If enough people were doing it, maybe it would train it.
I think
It's
it is a
definitely possible.
powerful tool. It's a powerful tool, and I think that it's only going to get better. And so I think that the tick that you're on, where you're like, hey, these things are going to revolutionize this, is absolutely correct. How soon, or how completely, or how effectively that'll happen, it's definitely up for debate, but it will happen.
Yeah, we're living definitely in interesting times. We had this little deviation to AI. We're all working on the scientific revolutions. That's fair to say.
No.
And I think you guys make a great contribution with this podcast. And yeah, I also look forward to the conference. Anything else we should discuss here? I think that's for me. It was a wonderful conversation because it was about you today.
Yeah, that's weird. We don't get to, we're not on this side of the interviewing very often.
Mm.
So thank you for having us.
Yeah.
It's been really fun to talk about some
Mhm.
different stuff.
Yeah, I'd really encourage everybody to come join us in Portugal this summer at Beyond the Big Bang. There's, links on our channel, links on your channel. It's at demystifysci.com. It's going to be a
Mhm. Be
really,
part of the revolution. Discuss, bring your ideas, convince other people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I think it could be a beautiful vacation too for you and your family, like whoever's
Mhm.
listening, it's a beautiful, it's right on the ocean. Every single
Definitely.
room
Yeah.
is has a view of the ocean, from what I understand. It's pretty
Mhm.
incredible. So I think it will just be a great, not only are we going to make history with these conversations, but I think that it's also going to be a really fun time. So
Mhm.
I hope as many people as we have tickets will come out.
Okay, so let's become Portugal the new Solvay. Yeah.
That's right.
exactly.
That is right.
Okay. Thanks,
Yeah,
you
thank you
guys,
so much,
All
and
right.
Alexander.
yeah, see you soon. Thank you very
Thank you
See you
much.
so
soon.
much.
Have a good night. Bye,
Goodbye.
everybody.